Theory and theology, what is up? What's going on? Over the weekend of Easter, I kind of started rereading a book that I did want to talk about, and I hadn't finished because I've been reading it so slowly. So I'm going to talk about the first 34 to 35 pages of this book. It's about 62 pages long. Actually, it's about 57 of actual content. So I'm around halfway done, a little bit. A little more than halfway done. So I might actually finish it up today. It's been a little rainy, so I've been trying to get into some books. So this book, I've talked about it a little bit before, but I want to actually talk about it in a couple segments. So depending how far I get today, and maybe if there's going to be another day, I'm hoping to finish it today. But it's called Mishnah and the Words of Jesus. Mishnah and the Words of Jesus. Dr. Roy B. It's by Dr. Roy B. Blizzard. Man, a little bit of my mind's still catching up this morning. Just had breakfast. So I don't even know where I want to start. I guess the contents of the book. There's a foreword, and then there's 4 sections. Section 1, tzedakah and righteousness. That's pages 13 through 24. Section 2, teaching, tithing, and silence. That's pages 25 to 36. Section 3, a good eye. That's pages 37 to 46. And the last section, section 4, the will of the Father. That's pages 47 to 58. And then we have a bibliography on page 59, and then about the author on page 61. And the book starts on page 7. The foreword is on page 7. And so it's less than 61 pages. It's probably about 51 pages or so for this book. So it's pretty short, pretty small. Copyrighted in 2013 by Bible Scholars Inc. BibleScholars.org out of Austin, Texas. So I guess some terminology here. So I've recorded a blog post about this before. I always confuse the words Mishnah and Midrash. According to Wikipedia, the Mishnah, spelled with an H at the end or no H at the end, is the first major written collection of Jewish oral traditions that are known as the Oral Torah. It is also the first major work of rabbinic literature. What is the Mishnah in the Bible? The Mishnah and the Hebrew Bible. Jews sometimes refer to this as Masorah, roughly translated as tradition, though that word is often used in a narrower sense to mean traditions concerning the editing and reading of the biblical text. What is the purpose of Mishnah? Mishnah and its purpose. It is viewed not only as a crucial source of information, but also as a part of a larger effort to both preserve the teachings of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, as well as analyze God's commandments to his people. How many books are in the Mishnah? Mishnah Torah consists of 14 books. There's more to that. And then, what's the difference between Talmud and Mishnah? In its broadest sense, the Talmud is a set of books consisting of the Mishnah, repeated study, the Gemara, completion, and certain auxiliary materials. The Mishnah is a collection of originally oral laws supplementing scriptural Torah. So, according to Jewish tradition, when Moses was on Sinai in the book of Exodus, he was given the written Torah and the oral Torah. Now, Christians don't really follow the oral Torah. The oral Torah tradition was passed down in Judaism and I believe later written down. That's where you get like Maimonides and Hillel, I guess, some of these other writers. If you go to is it Sephoria? I always mix up Sepharia.org. The Mishnah is the second one down, and you can see the different sections of it. There's a whole lot of different, and it says the Mishnah is the first major work of rabbinic literature, consisting of teachings transmitted over hundreds of years and compiled around 200 CE, or that would be BC for the people who use BC. AD. AD. So, sorry, I get those mixed up. 200 CE or 200 AD. So, 200 years after Christ, after Jesus. It covers agricultural, ritual, civil, criminal, and temple-related laws, presenting a multiplicity of legal opinions and incorporating occasional stories. It is a foundation of the Jewish oral tradition, which continues with the Talmud, a work that is structured as commentary on the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is oral Torah. So it expands on the Torah, but in an oral tradition that was later on compiled, written down. And then the Talmud is commentary on the Mishnah, on the oral Torah. And so if you look at the first one listed here, Seder Zeraim, agriculture. This isn't in the book. I'm looking on Sepharia.org. Just to give a background about what the Mishnah actually is. Because if people don't know what the Mishnah actually is, this book isn't going to make any sense to be talking about it. Barakot, blessings and prayers, focusing on Shema and the Amidah. So the Shema is Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one. And the Amidah is considered the prayer that is said by religious Jews when they say that they're davening, they're praying, the Amidah. Let me see. So this section of Sefer Zeraim, which is agriculture, the first section of that is called Berakot. Berakot means blessings or prayers. And if you want to start reading it, there's 9 chapters. It says composed Talmudic Israel circa 190 to 230 CE or 190 to 230 AD. Berakot Blessings is the first tractate of Zeraim seeds. Zeraim means seeds. And Seder is a book. So Seder Zeraim is like a book of seeds. They translated it to say agriculture, but seeds. The first order of the Mishnah, and the only tractate in Zeraim to include the Babylonian Talmud. Its 9 chapters discuss the laws of prayers, focusing on the Shema, the Amidah, blessings, and including those recited in the context of eating. So religious Jews have prayers with eating. Now, once you scroll past all the Hebrew, I'm not going to read much of this. I'm going to read the beginning. It says, the beginning of tractate Berachot, the first tractate in the Mishnah of the 6 orders of Mishnah, opens with a discussion of the recitation of Shema, as the recitation of Shema encompasses an acceptance of the yoke of heaven and of the mitzvot, and as such forms the basis for all subsequent teachings. The Mishnah opens with the law regarding the appropriate time to recite Shema. And then it goes into saying from when. So I guess I'll put it this way. There's the bold print and there's the non-bold print. So I think the bold print is the actual text, and the non-bold print is the added information that kind of expounds on it more. So I'm just going to read the bold. There's less of the bold. From when one recites the Shema in the evening, from the time when the priests enter to partake of their terumah, until the end of the first watch. This is coming from Deuteronomy 6:7. That is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. The rabbi says until midnight. Rabban Gamaliel says until dawn. So it's basically talking about the Shema, when you can say it, when you're supposed to say it. It's going to go into more details about that, and about other types of blessings. And even if the Bible says, in the Hebrew scriptures, let me see, 6, 7, so 6:4, the title in my Bible is the Great Commandment. So Deuteronomy 6:4, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, or the footnote says the Lord our God, the Lord our God is one, or the Lord our God, the Lord is one, or the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And then it goes into, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might, and keep these words that I am commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So something like that to a Christian, unless you know about Jewish traditions, so just reading it, it's capital Lord. Religious Jews say Hashem. Some people will say the 4-letter name of God. And that's the word Lord that's being used here. And let me see. And when it's talking about the words that are being commanded, it's reciting the 10 Commandments, statutes and the ordinances, and to observe those, and keep all those decrees and commandments. And so when it says to bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead, that's related to tefillin. There's a footnote saying as a frontlet. And then there's also the mezuzah that you'll see. Religious Jews will touch and kiss their hand, or the hand that touches it, as they're walking in a house or leaving a house, or walking in a room or leaving a room that has a mezuzah fixed to the doorpost. And so that's kind of the start of the Mishnah. It's kind of what it is in general. 20-minute explanation, kind of how it looks. So, say for example, there's the Shema in the Bible, Deuteronomy 6:4, and those related verses. And then there's the Mishnah that talks about the Shema. Now it gives different rabbis, it said Eliezer, Rabban Gamaliel, and we just scratched barely the surface, and I'm going to post that link for anyone who's interested. We didn't really talk about the Amidah. That is it's a prayer that's said often by religious Jews. They pray morning, noon, and night. Religious Jews pray 3 times a day in general. I'm generalizing here. But if they have the weekday, they have the morning service, afternoon service, and an evening service. Now, in the Christian Bible, when Jesus is teaching about praying, I kind of mentioned it before in a previous episode, where Jesus is basically just saying the Lord's Prayer. So basically that sums up the whole Amidah. And the Amidah's lengthy. Like, it's a lengthy prayer. If I look at the morning service, in a sitter. I have a sitter, a weekday sitter. So it has the weekday prayers, and this thing is about adding the Tehillim, which is the Psalms that get read. It's 478 pages. Now some of the prayers are for like death-related things, mourning, people who are in mourning and grieving over losses and different things like that. But the majority of it, or different holidays like Purim, Hanukkah, there's segments in there, and then there's different parts that have to do with the Torah readings for each Torah portion. And like I mentioned, the book of Psalms that are in there that, you know, some people read this stuff every week. So it's about 478 pages worth of text. Let's cut that in half because half of it's in Hebrew, and then it has some. I like the sitter because it has like commentary at the bottom, kind of giving explanations about the different things. But it has the blessing over different types of foods, all the types of blessings that you would do for holy days and through the week and everything. So the morning service, you know, it has the whole situation from when you rise to when you're putting on tzitzits, which are, you know, the tassels that are commanded, and then the talit, which is the shawl that is commanded, and putting on tefillin, which I just talked about, which talks about in the Shema about binding them on your forehead and your hand, and it just keeps going and going and going. And so the Amidah, even in the book, in the Siddur, the Amidah is pretty lengthy. But early Christians were taught to pray the Lord's Prayer, which is a lot shorter. It's like a shortened version of all those prayers, all the praying. And as far as I've gotten in this book, it kind of gives like a general summary again, about Mishnah, about Torah, about Mishnah, and about Talmud. And then it goes into talking about, in the Mishnah, order Nezikin, tractate Avot, and so it starts to talk about a part of the law that seems to be of most importance to Jesus, according to what Dr. Roy B. Blizzard is explaining. Like, he thinks that the church itself, you know, looks too much about Jesus, the worship of Jesus, the focus on Jesus, and not so much the words, the teachings of Jesus. What was Jesus saying to put into action? So that's how it says Mishnah in the words of Jesus. There's so much lack of focus on the learning and the doing compared to, you know, the worshiping or the praising. And so that's his main focus, is to look at where do Jesus' teachings seem to come from, according to the Mishnah that would have been passed down, that he would have known about likely, or would have been around people who knew about it, and the Torah as well. What in the oral Torah, though, this book is focused on the Mishnah, the oral Torah. What in the oral Torah would Jesus have been pulling out, you know, some of these ideas? And tzedakah he is the first thing that is mentioned. Tzedakah, or giving, charity. In Jewish culture, if there, you might notice there's a tzedakah box, and then he talks about gamilot, hasadim, and chesed, kind of the differences there, and talks about giving to the poor. Now, I guess one thing I've noticed that's different in Judaism compared to Christianity is, the amount of content that I tune into that's from Jewish culture that shows that there's a lot of giving as far as financial giving. Now, I was watching I can't remember who it was on YouTube that was talking about yeshiva, going to yeshiva, the Jewish religious school where the males are learning. I think it was Frida Wiesel's episode. She used to be Hasidic. She was interviewing this other guy. I'm always blanking on his name, but he did a really good interview with her. Kind of a younger guy, with a kind of British accent, and he was part of a community in England or the UK. I don't know where it was, but over there, where they're religious Jews, and he was kind of involved in a school that didn't really treat the kids right, and is really strict religious learning. And he talks about his story, how he overcame some things and his experience going there. But in his talk about that, he mentioned how, his family wasn't like impoverished. I think he was the one mentioning how, his family was sponsoring some other students for their tuition to be paid. Now, I don't know if it was him, it might have been some other person, but that is something that exists. If you tune into Chabad at all, there's opportunities for giving. If, I listen sometimes to the 8-minute daf, where they're learning from the Talmud online, and they post almost every day. And at the beginning, I guess they give kind of like thank you to, the certain sponsors. Like almost everything in Judaism has a sponsor. Sponsors, people who volunteer to contribute financially. There are people who support these podcasts. There are people who support the learning that's actually going on in the buildings that are being recorded for these video podcasts. People supporting, that you can get a free Talmud section. There's people who are purchasing these so that people like me can get a free one. There are people that are, people that are purchasing them, people that are probably contributing to, the food, if there's food or coffee, or, the rental of the room, if there is a price for the rental. I was watching, I think it was Frida Wiesel again. She had a video on Sukkot where people have a booths, or like the little structures that they stay in with the roof that's made of like plant material, and they kind of build these temporary structures, as a tradition every year during a certain time of year. I mean, it's all in the Old Testament why they do that and what to do and everything. And then you can see in religious Jewish areas where there's more people, or people who are open to do it in public, or like in New York or Israel, in certain places where you might not have like a big backyard or something, you could put up the structure on your balcony or outside, and there were people who, you know, help people to keep these mitzvot, these commandments, by sponsoring, you know, the building of a big sukkot where people can either stay overnight in the sukkot, you know, practice that tradition. They can get free food that's like potluck catered food, eat it as a, you know, and this is all sponsored. These people sponsor all of these things. And so that's something in Christian culture that I haven't really seen, like that whole sponsorship. And I think it does come from the religion, where, you know, people who aren't able to do things get sponsored by someone else, or there's helping, or there's people donating, or and so this book is talking about, in general, how that process is. Like who's giving. Yeah, that is something that definitely exists. You know, Jewish holy days, there's a lot of them, and if you think about how much it could potentially cost to be having to fill in, having a talit, having tzitzis, having a mezuzah. I mean, it's not like you're gonna buy these things every day. Like, once you have them, you have them. Having a menorah for Hanukkah, you know, having the different things you need to be able to practice the religion. I mean, when you're buying them all for the first time, or getting them all for the first time, or someone's giving them to you, like, it's not cheap stuff. Like, tefillin can be hundreds of dollars. Certain study materials, these books, you know, the Talmud chapters and the Chumash and all these things, they cost quite a bit of money. They can cost like $60, $30, you know, however much per book. You know, the materials are pricey. And so for people to be able to learn, or to even like practice, you know, they do have to contribute to at least their own household, or their own event or holiday. And a lot of the holidays last multiple days. And so if you're getting all the foods you need, and the kosher versions of them, and getting all the supplies you need, like, this isn't always free. So there are people that donate, so that people who can't afford it, who can't afford to keep all these, you know, all these commandments, they have somebody to help them keep the commandments financially. And it goes beyond the commandments. It's like for food and like basic needs and things like that too. But they also don't promote debt, and they don't promote like borrowing money, or getting charity. Like, it's not discouraged to get charity, but it's not, you know, it's like, if you can wait and tomorrow's your payday, then, you know, wait, you know, kind of that mentality. One thing that I saw that was interesting was on page 18, it talks about, it says, as you read, reflect back on some of the sayings of Jesus relative to the subject, and see if it does not ring a bell in your mind. It says, Maimonides talked about 8 ways tzedakah was performed, and the 8th way is a very important, it's probably the most, so I'm going to read the one that's least preferred way to give, and then the eighth one, which is the most preferred. I'm not going to read all the ones in between. So the least preferred way to give is number 1, to give but sadly. And then it says, remember, Jesus taught that the Lord loves a cheerful giver. And then the eighth way, which is the best of ways, is to help the poor to rehabilitate themselves by lending them money, taking them into partnership, employing them, or giving them work. For in this way, the end is achieved without any loss of self-respect at all. And this comes from Maimonides in Yad Matanot Aniyim 10, sections 12 through sections 7 through 12. So there's a lot about Maimonides' writings in the Mishnah, and there's other stuff in between that talks about, like, either if the person receiving the money does or doesn't know, or the person giving the money does or doesn't know. You can see that, like, the least way to give is just to be, like, bitter about it and, like, I don't want to give, but I have to. I feel this obligation, or this person's, like, asking me for money, and, like, fine, here's a couple bucks. Versus actually being involved with a plan for this person to kind of build up their life through employment. That's way more involved than just sliding somebody like $2, $5 outside of a 7-Eleven who's, like, begging for change, right? And so, yeah. And when it talks about terumah, that is the first fruits offerings. So that is another, I don't know, there's a lot biblically to look at as far as giving. But, for people who do go through the New Testament, looking into kind of like what Jesus says to do, is one way of, studying that can be very beneficial to kind of see, like, okay, what is the comparison? What was Jesus teaching these Jewish people to do? And so, that's about all I have to say for now, as far as, like, a pretty basic intro into the Mishnah. It's such a complex thing. It was hard for me to give, like, a short explanation. But, the Mishnah would have been something Jesus would have been involved with, as religious Jews at the time were involved with the Mishnah. Christians aren't. I've never really heard of a Christian church that even teaches what it is, hardly. The Christian church seems to be very against teaching about Judaism at all, even though Jesus was completely Jewish. And Christianity as it's practiced today, Jesus wasn't doing most of that. He was living his life as a religious Jew. So, but he was teaching other things that ultimately got him in a lot of trouble. And threats of death, and, a lot of being run out of town and needing to escape and fleeing and hiding out because of his teaching. And that was always something I was wondering, is that common was that common in that day and age for Jewish rabbis to be like on the run like that and constantly being threatened of death? Because he was threatened a lot. He was threatened quite often. Like, you see him running all over like, almost every time he's interacting with the Pharisees and the scribes, he ends up running away, or they end up trying to want to kill him. And to me, that's, I guess the Torah does tell them to kill the false people. Tells they're supposed to kill them, and so that's kind of weird to me. But I mean, if you're trying to preserve your religion, that's one extreme way to go about it. Just kill the people who say something else. But either he was able to talk himself out of it, or explain himself more. There's a lot more that I want to go into with that kind of stuff, but I'll get through the rest of the book, explain it to you guys a little bit more as far as what comes up for me. I'm not gonna do like the whole 3 pages at a time thing. I just want to finish it, because otherwise I'll be reading this thing for like a year. But I don't want to explain too much detail, because I think it's a short enough book that people can get for themselves to read. And if they're interested in these topics, they might like it. But this is kind of just my explanation of how I'm approaching it, and kind of like some of the history behind it. And I'm gonna try to post some notes, a little bit of notes at least, about what those verses were that were kind of looked up, or like that link to the Mishnah, so you guys can have that. And if you're interested, I'll post the part that I kind of read, and I'll post some of the other stuff, so you can just kind of, at least if you know nothing about it, you can kind of look at it for free online. And if you know about it, you'll have a resource link to kind of go to if you're interested in the Mishnah, if you get more interested in it. But I think this book is an interesting perspective, because in Christianity you never really hear or think about where was Jesus getting these teachings. Yeah, people say from God, but also it's like there was a tradition behind it too that was familiar. And I think that's why a lot of the New Testament, when Christians read it, they're like, what is all this? Because they're not familiar with the Mishnah. They're not even usually familiar with the Torah. And so they start taking these things that Jesus says to do and kind of spinning it in some other direction. I guess the main example that they gave, I'd say look it up yourselves. Look up the difference between what Jesus says about the concept of divorce. It's written here in this book. What Jesus says about the topic of divorce. Compare that to the Old Testament. So Matthew 5:31, Jesus talks about divorce. Compare that to Deuteronomy 24:1. And then there's these arguments with Hillel and Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah in the order Nashim, Tractate Gittin 9, section 10, talking about divorce, and just kind of going from there. But I'm gonna post this, and I'll get through the rest of it. I'll post once or twice more about it, depending how many more times I'm gonna sit and read this stuff, and then I'll be done with it because it's a short book. If I come across any other interesting books or books that I like, I mean, I'll recommend them to you guys and talk about them some more. But for now, that's about it. That's about all for now.